You don't have to travel outside the city or all the way across the city to play in a creek, to find salamanders. It's all free access. It gives every neighborhood character and a connection with the natural world.
5,000 acres in over 100 parks and preserves, 18 scenic overlooks, and 65 miles of trails, all set in the beauty of the Ohio River Valley and connected by ribbons of green. This abundance of nature didn't happen by accident. It blossomed out of the gifted design of an historic plan and grew by the hands of laborers during the Great Depression. Through the actions of generations of devoted people, it evolved into one of the top urban park systems in the country.
It's one of the undeniable assets that we have in this city, and there are so few cities that can compete with us on this level. Our parks system is one of the things that makes us special.
The green backdrop to everyday life in Cincinnati. Gems to be cherished. A legacy that's endured. Cincinnati Parks. Whether it's the view from an overlook, a daily walk in a neighborhood park, or an outdoor lunch break, parks are so integrated into Cincinnati life that they're sometimes taken for granted. It wasn't always so. The need for parks wasn't even considered until the middle of the 19th century, when Cincinnati became crowded with rapid growth, and early park history was filled with ambivalence and controversy. State legislation didn't allow cities to own or manage parks until the 1850s, and city officials were hesitant to use public land because of maintenance costs and reduced tax income. The city even rejected early donations of land for parks, afraid that patrons like Nicholas Longworth, a wealthy landowner and pioneer in American winemaking, were trying to unload worthless property.
There are certainly stories told about Nicholas Longworth repeatedly trying to give land to the city and the city fathers saying they were not interested in getting it. By the 20th century, people sort of lamented the fact that the city could have greatly increased the amount of parkland it had, but it seems as though the city council was not really interested in parks until after the Civil War.
In the middle of the 19th century, the first parks were pieced together out of properties that had originally been designated for other purposes. Piatt Park was donated by John and Benjamin Piatt for use as a market in 1817. Today it's a favorite outdoor destination for downtown residents and workers. Lincoln Park, demolished to make way for Union Terminal, and Washington Park were originally cemeteries.
Lincoln Park had about 10 acres. You could rent a boat and go boating. You could go ice skating. The city used land that it already owned, which had been for a pest house and pauper's graveyard. And for Washington Park, they purchased cemetery land adjoining Washington Square. They also, in 1866, got their first parkland donated to them, which was land in Mount Auburn, just 1 acre, called Hopkins Park, which was the first land the city accepted as a park.
The city was growing at a tremendous rate. It was a very dense city, particularly in the West End. And as the city was filling up all the space in the basin and started to grow up the hillsides, it became clear that the city needed some breathing room. So the city started to set aside, not many, but a few parks.
Mount Storm Park sits majestically atop a hill overlooking the Mill Creek Valley. In 1851, it was the estate of Robert Bonner Bowler, a wealthy man in the dry goods business. Moving to the hilltop suburb of Clifton to escape the filthy air and crowded conditions of the basin, Bowler and other wealthy families built large homes on extensive tracts of land. The Temple of Love, Mount Storm's most notable landmark, stands as a reminder of the grand estate that once occupied the site. The Corinthian-style pergola was designed by the first great Cincinnati Parks superintendent, Adolf Strauch.
Adolf Strauch was a Prussian landscape architect. He studied in Vienna and other places around Europe and was working at the Great Exposition in London when he met Robert Bonner Bowler. They chatted it up for a while. He said, hey, if you're ever in the United States, stop and visit me. Well, Strauch did come to the United States. He had a delay in his train schedule in Cincinnati, decided he'd visit Bowler, and got the Mount Storm estate, and never ended up going back to Europe. Bowler hired him to manage the estate.
He started getting other jobs here in Clifton, the Neff estate, the Buchanan estate, Probasco. He probably did virtually every single estate in Clifton. He would open up the scenery, he would take down fences, he would take down tree lines that blocked views. If your barn he considered ugly, he would come to you and say, you know, your barn is a blight on the landscape, and I'm educated in these things. I have the taste to tell you this, and you have to tear it down. And most of the time, people complied.
He became superintendent of Spring Grove Cemetery and brought a whole new idea of how to do cemeteries. Before, everything was divided up into little square lots with fences around it, and you put whatever kind of shtick you wanted into it. He tore down the fences, and he's the reason that Spring Grove Cemetery is as gorgeous as it is now.
People used cemeteries in much the same way we might think of parks, as places to go for walks, picnic areas. And that sort of landscaped outdoor space became a kind of visual model for what a park should be like. It also became a legislative model, because when the state of Ohio first creates legislation allowing cities to have parks, they base that on the legislation for cemeteries.
Under Strauch's supervision, Spring Grove became an internationally renowned landscape gardening site.
There's a wonderful quote from Frederick Olmsted, the designer of New York's Central Park, saying that when he needed inspiration, when he was just stumped and didn't have any ideas, he would come to Cincinnati and visit Spring Grove Cemetery and walk through it with Adolf Strauch.
Well, heck, you can't let a guy like that get away. He got hired to become superintendent of Cincinnati Parks, and he brought that same kind of landscape vision to the parks. He brought in this idea of vistas, groves of trees that would guide people's visions to a beautiful site, a focal point. So we have him to thank for a lot of the beauty that you find in Burnet Woods, in Eden Park. That's who he was. He was the first big visionary who turned us into a gorgeous system.
Eden Park is perhaps Cincinnati's best-known and best-loved park. The historic Springhouse gazebo has long been an icon of the city. Eden Park offers magnificent views of the Ohio River and the pastoral Twin Lakes and Mirror Lake, and provides a home to the Cincinnati Art Museum, Playhouse in the Park, Season Good Pavilion, and the Crone Conservatory.
Eden Park has virtually everything in it that we have in the park board. We have ponds, we have fountains, we have statues, we have artwork, architecture, large landscape, flower beds, trees, memorial groves. Just about everything represented in the park board is here.
In 1859, the city purchased the first parcel of land that would become Eden Park from Nicholas Longworth, despite having previously rejected it as a gift. Longworth had called the property, which had been part of his vineyards, the Garden of Eden. The city purchased it for use as a waterworks.
The city was growing and they needed a larger reservoir, and Eden Park, being up on a hill, provided an appropriate place for such a reservoir. And as a measure to protect the water supply, the desire was to limit development around the reservoir. So it was not initially planned as a park, although at the same time the mayor was calling for a people's park, a place that would be easily accessible to citizens with much more acreage than Lincoln Park.
Some of the prominent buildings in Eden Park are related to the waterworks. Elsinore Tower and the pumping station as well as the water tower. Mirror Lake covers over what used to be the reservoir, and there's a section of huge stone wall that used to enclose it.
Burnet Woods is 90 acres of natural beauty in the heart of Clifton. The park's mature trees, hiking trails, and bandstand have provided outdoor entertainment for generations of Cincinnati residents.
In the park, we have a lake where you can fish. You don't even need a fishing license. We have the Trailside Nature Center there that's open 5 days a week. You can bring your children by, stop in, check out the Nature Center. We have public planetarium shows that occur monthly. You can see what's going on in the night sky on any evening of the year.
Burnet Woods was preserved by Judge Jacob Burnet, a prominent 19th century citizen. His heirs, Robert W. Burnet and William S. Grosbeck, leased and then sold the property to the city amid opposition. Some proponents of parks complained that Burnet Woods wasn't accessible to those who needed it most, people living in the congested city downtown. They argued it was being built to provide a grand space for carriage rides for the wealthy residents nearby. But Burnet Woods was also opposed by some of the Clifton elite.
Many of the citizens of Clifton didn't like the idea of having a park where Burnet Woods is. They said it would bring up the people of the city, the immigrant class. The leader in the charge against building Burnet Woods, and ultimately against building parks at all, is Henry Probasco, who's also on the board of Spring Grove Cemetery. It's said that he was responsible for prevailing on the state legislature in 1874 to abolish park boards and effectively abolish parks. Strauch just focused on building the parks. He didn't let any of the noise around him distract him. I think he was aware that he had a limited amount of time to do this. And he kept pushing and he kept focusing. He managed to get most of Eden Park finished and a good deal of Burnet Woods before the state of Ohio effectively abolished parks.
Strauch worked hard to develop his vision, but resigned as superintendent in 1875, frustrated by relentless controversy.
By the mid-1890s, parks are back in business. Now, Cincinnati didn't lose Burnet Woods and Eden Park. The city had never been against parks. The citizens of Cincinnati, to my knowledge, have never voted against money for parks. And I don't believe City Council has ever, in any real sense, done that either.
By the turn of the 20th century, Cincinnati was a growing industrial city of 326,000, but had only 6 parks comprising fewer than 400 acres. But changes were on the way, inspired by the City Beautiful movement. Its proponents aim to beautify cities and create visual order with the use of boulevards, wide avenues, public parks, and squares. In Cincinnati, the movement crystallized as the Greater Park League. Founded in 1906 by Levi Addison Ault and Irwin M. Crone, the Greater Park League drove passage of new state legislation and campaigned residents in Cincinnati for a park commission that would be independent of local politics.
By the early 20th century, people around the country thought that we needed a different set of amenities in parks. And one of the big concerns were playgrounds and playlots. So there was an effort often by women's clubs to start little sand lots or places where children could play.
They built playgrounds. They created within themselves a recreation commission. The Recreation Commission was originally a commission of the Cincinnati Park Board. They want to make sure when children wake up in the morning, they don't have to play in the streets and run afoul of the police.
Voters supported the initiative, resulting in the first Board of Park Commissioners led by Levi Ault. The new board's first major step was to commission a comprehensive park plan.
They hired a man named George Kesler, and Kesler had done many other landscape plans, many other park plans. He did the park plan and later became the superintendent for Kansas City's parks and parkways. So it was really a landmark for us. This was a park system of hilltop parks, of linked green spaces and parkways. And Kesler was astounded to come to town and see the wonderful natural assets that we had.
The Park Board adopted Kesler's plan titled A Park System for the City of Cincinnati in 1907. It was not only the first organized plan for parks, but it was the first organized plan for the city of Cincinnati as well.
The Kesler Plan was the first time an effort was made to look at the city as a whole and try to direct its future development.
It was a plan of large scope and scale. Parkways were planned along the old Miami and Erie Canal and along the Ohio River. Boulevards would connect major parks, squares, and buildings. Major new hilltop parks were proposed, as well as smaller sites for the city's dense neighborhoods. It was all in stark contrast to the character of the city at the time. Many of Kesler's recommendations were not implemented until much later, but a park system for the city of Cincinnati was a visionary plan whose legacy is the Cincinnati Park system today. The Park Board found great support for the Kesler Plan, enabling their progress. Existing parks were improved, and new parks were acquired. Mount Airy Forest was purchased and became one of the first urban reforestation projects in the United States.
Prior to 1911, the area where Mount Airy Forest is today was a series of vegetable and dairy farms. The farmers, as was the practice of the day, had cleared the hillsides of all trees, and as a result, there was a lot of heavy soil erosion going on. Whole hillsides were literally sloughing off.
Several parks created in the years following the Kesler Plan include impressive Italian Renaissance-inspired pavilions.
Some of the most beautiful buildings in Cincinnati Parks are our Italian Renaissance-style pavilions in Alt Park, Mount Echo, and Alms Park. And they're characterized by their monumentality, their use of arcades, and classical detail. And it's very representative of the robust economy during the 1920s and also the climax of the American Renaissance or City Beautiful movement, which started 30 years earlier.
Mount Echo Park in Price Hill provides a dramatic view of Cincinnati, Kentucky, and the Ohio River. The pavilion was designed by architects Rendiggs, Panzer, and Martin. A.D. Taylor, a landscape architect of national renown, designed the terrace and landscaping. The pavilion at Alt Park is considered the grandest of all Cincinnati Park buildings. Designed by Feckheimer and Ihorst, it provides a panoramic view of the Miami River Valley. The surrounding terrace, cascade fountain, and formal gardens were designed by A.D. Taylor. Alt Park was donated by Levi Alt, founder of the Greater Park League, first Park Board president, and commissioner from 1908 until 1926. Alms Park sits atop another of the city's eastern hills and offers vistas of the Ohio and Little Miami River valleys below. The property for Alms Park was donated by Eleanor Alms in memory of her husband Frederick. It includes a pavilion in the Italian Renaissance style, designed by Stanley Matthews and Charles Wilkins Short, Jr. The stone gateway to the park and the pavilion's front terrace and walks were designed by A.D. Taylor. Like Eden Park, the Alms Park property was once owned by Nicholas Longworth.
And actually to this day in Alms Park, you can still see some of the grapevines on the south-facing hillsides, and the only remaining wine cellar we know of, that was part of Nicholas Longworth's property.
The park system grew dramatically in the years following the Kesler Plan. By 1925, it included 70 parks, playgrounds, and squares. To promote continued growth, the City Planning Commission emphasized the importance of continued investment in parks, as noted in its landmark 1925 City Plan. That commitment would prove crucial as the United States entered the Great Depression. The country was on the brink of catastrophic change as Cincinnati filled in the Miami and Erie Canal and constructed Central Parkway following the design of the Kesler Plan. The grand vision and style of park development that characterized the 1920s would diminish greatly as the stock market crashed and the country entered the Great Depression.
The Depression had an enormous effect on design of Cincinnati parks and park buildings. We couldn't afford any longer to build those fancy park pavilions, and there was a shift toward more informal rural landscapes.
Ironically, the Depression resulted in unprecedented growth. The creation of Roosevelt's New Deal relief agencies provided Cincinnati with funding to complete many of the park projects outlined in the 1925 City Plan. Nearly half of the structures that exist in Cincinnati Parks today were built between 1929 and 1943. Mount Airy Forest was transformed.
The city had started this practice of trying to reforest these hillsides, and we got so far, we had a plan in place, but we didn't really have the resources to do what we wanted to do.
It was largely undeveloped until the New Deal, when programs like the WPA and the CCC, that is the Works Progress Administration and the Civilian Conservation Corps, made possible huge investment in its development.
The CCC brought more than 200 African American men to Mount Airy. Led by George Case, Team 1505C stayed for 2 years and planted over 1 million trees.
And they arrived via truckload from Fort Hill out near Chillicothe in the summer of 1935. The gentlemen that came here were young African American men in their early 20s that were employed in replanting barren fields, doing soil conservation, really repairing the land after many, many years of hard use. As you drive through Mount Airy Forest today, you'll see all kinds of remnants of the work they did. They built trails throughout the park, they reforested the hillside, built erosion control dams, check dams, and built a lot of the shelters and comfort stations that we see throughout the park today.
Throughout the park system, many of the New Deal era structures were designed by local architect Carl Freund. Hired in 1930, Freund designed 37 park buildings over a period of 30 years and is largely credited with defining the overall architectural character of the parks. He designed many buildings in the rustic style, and his later work shows the influence of Frank Lloyd Wright.
Carl Freund designed some wonderful buildings in Cincinnati Parks, and one of my favorites is the Trailside Museum building in Burnet Woods. It was built with WPA and CCC labor, and it combines the rustic and Wrightian styles, and it's a very fanciful, wonderful building. Another one of my favorites by Freund is the shelter in Mount Echo, which was completed in 1940, also with WPA labor. It's really nothing more than a roof supported by 2 massive chimneys, and I think it's just delightful the way that it frames the view from Mount Echo.
The pavilion at Bellevue Hill Park is one example of Freund's modern designs.
It looks almost like a flying saucer because the core of the building is a rounded form and it has a circular roof that extends from it. There's also a marvelous view from that park, which makes it special.
New parkways were also constructed during the Great Depression. Rapid Run Parkway, Torrance Parkway, Victory Parkway, and Columbia Parkway were all completed in the 1930s. Work accomplished during the Great Depression is evident throughout the park system today, bringing character to the built environment and providing amenities for generations of users.
At the Trailside Nature Center, running up to the building, you will find one of the old stone retaining walls built by a WPA project. In the wall, there's a series of steps that take you down into the lower valley, and running alongside those steps, there's a concrete slide. Not only do we have young children going down it today, we have grandmothers and grandfathers coming back and relating stories of how when they were 5 or 6, they went down that slide, and they brought their grandchildren back to have the same experience that they did when they were younger.
Development in the parks slowed during World War II, but picked up again in the 1950s and 60s, motivated by post-war prosperity and the baby boom. By 1966, there were 113 properties. Cincinnati Parks had amassed an outstanding legacy of parks and parkways that included a significant body of architecture and other amenities. Small neighborhood parks make up the majority of properties, providing easy access to nature across the city.
One of the special, unique parts of Cincinnati Parks, it's sort of European in its design. Europe has a lot of little tiny pocket parks, and so does Cincinnati.
Our parks are there to discover, and there's a lot of parks out there that people don't know, small parks, neighborhood parks that people can go to, maybe only spend a couple hours at, but they can walk away with that feeling, hey, I found someplace new in Cincinnati that I never knew about.
In the late 60s and early 70s, new overlook parks were added at hilltop sites that had once housed inclines. Olden View in East Price Hill, Bellevue Park in Clifton Heights, Jackson Hill in Mount Auburn, and Incline Park in Mount Adams. The Kesler Plan provided the roadmap for success, and the work programs of the New Deal built a wealth of structures. But the growth of the park system wouldn't have been possible without the generosity of many donors.
French Park is a large tract of land that was donated to the park board by Mr. French, who was a P&G executive. It has a beautiful stream that runs through it if you ever get down into the woods.
Something like 20 to 25% of the park system has come about through donations, and it's a wonderful tradition that we've had with us really for 100 years.
From the beginning, Cincinnati Parks has been so really blessed with generous people, with donors who've given park lands to the people of the city. Owl's Nest Park was given by two brothers who just wanted to preserve their home site where their parents had lived. Rawson Woods in Clifton was given by a family that just wanted to preserve a sense of what Clifton used to look like. The reasons vary, but in all cases, it's folks wanting to give to other people in the city what they value and love.
Many donors contributed property to protect the natural beauty of a site. Some had well-developed gardens that helped to build the horticultural assets of the park system. The heirs of Charles Fleischman, founder of Fleischman Yeast Company, gave the site of their father's home to the park board in 1925. A.D. Taylor designed the original gardens for the park. Fleischman Gardens retains the estate's original iron gates and boasts the largest ginkgo tree in the state of Ohio. Houck Botanic Garden is the former estate of Cornelius J. Houck, who served as a park commissioner for 18 years. Houck was an avid horticulturalist who planted 900 species of trees, shrubs, and evergreens at his home that he called Sooty Acres.
Hinkle Gardens across from Crone Conservatory is another little sort of pocket park, but it has a collection of magnolia trees, which is just outstanding. So about 2 to 3 weeks in the spring, it's magical.
In Alt Park, we have the Old Rose Gardens, which a lot of people know them as the perennial gardens. We also have what we call the Adopt-A-Plots, which used to be Old Rose Gardens too, and they're maintained by volunteers.
Another great horticultural asset we have is Mount Airy's Arboretum, and it is one of the finest arboretums in the country. So few people know about it, it's almost a secret.
From the beginning, Cincinnati benefited from a strong horticultural tradition led by early pioneers like Nicholas Longworth and Cornelius Houck, and organizations like the Cincinnati Horticultural Society. Another Cincinnatian, John Aston Warder, helped to found the American Forestry Congress, an organization that brought attention to the problem of deforestation. It became the American Forestry Association. The Congress met in Cincinnati in 1882 and brought about a massive tree planting effort in Eden Park.
There were 50,000 volunteers. Every child in Cincinnati was able to get out of school for the day and go to Eden Park and plant trees. And a lot of President's Grove was planted then. We still have that legacy today of President's Grove and of Eden Park as we know it as being a forested park, which before it was an abandoned vineyard with no tree cover at all.
Warder Nursery, another of the park's horticultural assets, is named after the forestry pioneer. The nursery has been providing plant material for shows and park displays since 1926.
What is in existence currently are 10 very nice sized greenhouses. In those greenhouses, we raise a lot of the plant material, almost everything that comes down here for a show. It also supports the flowers and the change out of seasonal things in the park areas. So the annuals that you might see on Torrance Parkway or Alt Park, those are raised and propagated at Warder Nursery.
Crone Conservatory in Eden Park is the showcase for Cincinnati Parks horticulture. Built in 1933 with funding from the Civil Works Administration, it's named in honor of Irwin M. Crone, one of the first proponents of the parks and a park commissioner from 1912 to 1948. The site originally held the greenhouses of Nicholas Longworth. The Crone Conservatory holds a variety of permanent collections. In addition, it hosts 6 seasonal shows that are popular with visitors year-round.
Visitors who come here often bring us photos of their family and their special experiences here. We have a very heavy, repetitive base of Cincinnati visitors, particularly for tradition-based shows like Easter and Christmas, where families come and it becomes a family tradition year after year to come back to the conservatory.
Cincinnati Parks held its first international butterfly show at Crone Conservatory in 1996. Now the biggest show of the year, it draws visitors and butterflies from around the world.
Many people who are physically or monetarily challenged may never be able to go visit a rainforest, but to come into Crone, you can actually have that up-close experience. I think we have such a unique place, and it is up to us as stewards of this place to let people know and to get that word out, to tell people why come here.
The butterfly show, like a host of other parks endeavors, wouldn't be possible without the help of a broad base of dedicated volunteers.
One of the largest volunteer projects we've had over the last few years is the butterfly show, because that takes consistently 500 to 600 volunteers just for that short period of time of 8 weeks.
Parks cannot operate without volunteerism. We are huge supporters of volunteerism. Our volunteers are a type of staff. They're volunteer staff.
Last year we had over 80,000 hours of volunteerism. That equates to around $1 million worth of labor for us. Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts have always been a traditional group, and so have garden clubs. Also, schools now are requiring so many students to do volunteer hours.
Corporate volunteerism is a trend that's emerged in recent years, bringing another major source of help into the parks.
We have worked with, let's say, 20 different corporations where we have one huge day, and the mayor came and kicked it off. They spent a whole morning just doing different parks. I think we had 50 different locations because we had well over 1,000 people.
The Park Board has always worked to protect existing properties within the system. In 1970, construction of I-71 threatened to destroy a downtown haven, Lytle Park. Instead of being demolished, it became the first interstate decked park in the United States. The importance of hillside and waterway protection also became evident at that time. Parks responded by adding over 30 hillsides and preserves. The push for acquisition and development of new parks that marked the first half of the 20th century gave way to different challenges by the 1970s. City budget cuts reduced park funding as major maintenance needs became apparent. Some parks were in danger of closing. In Alt Park, motorcycle gangs threatened the safety and access of visitors.
In the mid-70s, the Iron Horseman motorcycle gang decided to make this location in Alt Park up here at the pavilion their headquarters. And this was where they came every day to party and hang out. The park deteriorated, maintenance declined, gardening declined, all the things the community really enjoyed were fading away. The motorcycle gang decided to move on, which was wonderful, except the park was still in a terrible state of disrepair. The pavilion was condemned. If we were going to make this place turn around, if we were going to save it, we were going to have to start something ourselves. So we started in 1980 or so The big project we faced was restoration of the pavilion, which was a multi-million-dollar project. And we cut a deal with the city where they would match the money we raised. And we got the pavilion restored. Once we had that success under our belt, we restored the fountain, and then several other projects of smaller scale, but all important. We sponsor some free dances for the community to come enjoy the place. We get them up here from 18 months old to 80 years old. It's very fulfilling. People realize that whether it's them getting out and pulling weeds in the Adopt-A-Plot garden or them contributing to Alt Park Advisory Council, they're a part of it, and that's critical.
We have over 20 park advisory councils now. From the very beginning, our park system's really been as much or more about citizens and citizen action than city staff.
Citizen action helped sustain the parks through tough times. Then the Park Board launched an era of renovation in 1992 with its new master plan, Planting the Future. It renewed and expanded on the vision of the 1907 Kesler Plan.
One of the things it did was look at the Kesler Plan and propose an even more extensive system of parkways. It also proposed a system of greenways that weren't necessarily parkways, but were corridors that connected up parks, connected up parkways, and preserved natural habitat.
We developed a management plan to beautify interstate highway system. We also looked at other parts of the city that we felt neglected, but were important spaces. Most of those have to do with transportation corridors, new pedestrian linkages, reconnecting neighborhoods, and also reconnecting our natural systems that were divided by the interstate highway system.
Tree care is another priority. The Forestry Unit, created in the 1930s to manage Mount Airy, maintains 5,000 acres of forest and cares for trees along 1,000 miles of streets in the city of Cincinnati. Trees all over the region suffered a blow in 2008 when the remnants of Hurricane Ike moved through. The impact on trees under park care was monumental.
We had over 500 locations with trees down. We had about 20 trees on houses and probably another 25 on top of cars. Eden Park was one of the most damaged by the storm, especially the President's Grove area. We had probably 15 or 20 large mature trees down. It came as a big loss. It's going to be a long-term struggle to replant and reestablish the tree canopy in the historical aspect of President's Grove.
A new threat that's requiring the response of park foresters is the emerald ash borer.
This ash borer has moved into Cincinnati over the last 20 years and is now a very important threat to our native ash trees. With thousands and thousands and thousands of ash trees throughout the city, it's impossible for us to preventatively treat all of them. We're going to remove about 100 of our biggest, most overmature ash street trees in the city. And those are amongst our highest safety priority to get addressed because they can fall in the road or fall on someone's house or in someone's car.
But the Park Board isn't letting the lumber go to waste. They're partnering with Cincinnati Public Schools in an innovative program that puts the wood to good use.
CPS is in the process of building approximately 20 new schools throughout the city. And we have identified these trees as a valuable resource for urban timber. We saw the logs into lumber, and then we deliver that to a kiln operation. CPS pays to dry the wood and reimburses us $1 for each and every board foot. And of that, approximately 40 cents of each board foot is being used for new tree planting along city streets and in school properties.
Land management in the parks includes control of many plant and animal species. The removal of honeysuckle, which crowds and soon replaces native vegetation, is a current priority. Common land management practices, like mowing, have changed to become more sensitive to wildlife.
In the 70s, 80s, we mowed a lot of grass. And during the early 1990s, we realized that, hey, we're mowing a lot of areas that we really shouldn't mow. So we began a meadowland program where we allowed some of these hillsides, some of the more dangerous areas to mow, to convert back to meadow. In Kennedy Park, we were really blessed because we have a natural wetland there. We had a couple hillsides that have some beautiful trees whose root systems are sensitive to root compaction and root disturbance, so we stopped mowing those hillsides, allowed them to become reforested, and planted several different species of wetland plants in the wetland, built an observation deck there, and it's a very popular spot in the park now for dog walking, for bird watching, and wildlife watching. The maintenance of these prairies, if you don't either mow them or burn them once every few years, they begin to try to revert back to forest. If we do a burn, we try to time that early in March so that we get it before the toads and the snakes and some of the other reptiles and amphibians are out. We'll take a walk through the prairie, you know, kind of making a lot of noise. We'll look for insect egg sacs, praying mantis egg sacs, stuff like that, and we'll pull those out. We try not to burn or mow all of these areas at once. So in one park, we save sections of them so that we have places for the wildlife to go to or to remain in while we're doing our activities in the other section.
Cincinnati Parks Land Management Division also maintains over 60 miles of trails. The Mayor's Greenleaf Program, a work program for teens, delivers another source of help with trail and park maintenance.
We have 50 students that we have working with us in the summer. And last year we had them work almost like the CCC did. They worked in Mount Airy and they rebuilt trails. And it was so fun to see these kids who probably have never been on a trail or in a forest, so to speak, learning how to build trails, to build steps, to build bridges.
While the parks have always been about conservation, recent initiatives focus efforts toward finding new ways to be green.
In Eden Park alone, we have 120 solar panels. We have a wind turbine that actually gives me fuel and powers my administrative building. We have solar trash cans, and they are really terrific because there's a solar panel on top of the trash can and they compact the trash. Those parks that don't have solar trash cans, we have to go and empty those trash cans every single day. So you think about the particulate, you think about the damage that's actually occurring to the infrastructure, the roads, the gasoline that's being used, all that is negated because a solar trash can, that only needs to be changed or dumped once every 3 weeks.
Cincinnati Parks has always had a strong sense of preservation and conservation of natural resources and natural habitats as part of its mission. There's a sense that a park is a landscaped lawn, a picnic area, some swing sets. The natural habitat component is something I think that makes Cincinnati Parks special over a lot of other urban systems.
The parks enlighten and enrich the Cincinnati community through a variety of nature education programs. Nature education began in 1934 when the first park naturalist, Hester Stevenson, was hired.
Hester Stevenson was the Cincinnati Parks' first full-time naturalist. She was hired to kickstart a nature education program for the Cincinnati Parks, which she did. Gave her life to it, actually, all the way down to traveling the Cincinnati streetcars with stacks of metal signs on her lap and then lugging them into the woods to put them up on trees so that people could hike through the parks and learn.
Today, the Park Board provides nature education to people of all ages, but targets its outreach to elementary-age children. Programs are offered in a variety of parks and at 5 nature centers.
Avon Woods, Caldwell Nature Center, California Nature Center, Trailside Nature Center right here in Burnet Woods, and then La Boida Woods. In many ways, what we do at each of them is sort of similar. During the school year, lots and lots and lots of school class field trips. During the summer, lots of summer camps for kids. Summer day camps typically last for about a week. Children spend most of their time outdoors in nature. They serve children from age 3.5 all the way up to about 14. Nature Next Door is our summer outreach program. We work with community groups, church groups, youth groups, boys and girls clubs that are providing summer programming. We offer free programming for them, but the real heart and soul is the drop-in kids, the ones who really don't have any planned activities for the summer. They can just come. And then year-round, we do the public programs for all ages. A lot of them are geared towards adults, and special events in communities, neighborhoods, and in the parks.
People visit parks primarily to experience nature, but the parks offer cultural experiences too. Free activities like Shakespeare in the Park draw enthusiastic crowds for one-time events, while public art like sculptures, monuments, and memorials raise the level of interest in parks every day.
We are the biggest single steward of public art in the city, and as I understand it, one of the biggest collections of public art in any park system in the Midwest. Many of those have come about over time because people have the urge to donate art or because they want to create a memorial or a monument. And parks have traditionally been a place that has public sculpture. But we've got many wonderful works of art that we're very proud of, and that again is part of the legacy of our history, that we're not just stewards of wonderful landscapes and historic buildings, but also of art.
Despite many challenges, Cincinnati Parks continue to grow with new parks and new features. Theodore M. Berry International Friendship Park is a major effort that opened in 2003, bringing a significant body of art to the park's collection.
It's a park that is about a number of themes. It's about international friendship and understanding, but it's also about man's relationship to nature. It's about our role in the world community, and it's about the diversity of world culture. One piece, Seven Vessels Ascending Descending, is all about man's relationship to the sun. The Crystalline Tower is about our relationship to nature, and in fact it has moving parts that move with the movement of the wind and make a sound. Virtually every piece of the park relates to these themes in one way or another.
Park officials say the benefits of the new park go beyond providing citizens another tie to nature and art. They maintain that parks spur economic development and help to maintain viability in urban areas.
That whole line along Eastern Avenue, which is now Riverside Drive, was just a desolate old dumping ground of just salvage parts. Well, we cleaned up that area, we put the park in. It's a 25-acre park, half-mile stretch. Eastern Avenue is now Riverside Drive. And just north of that are some beautiful condos. So that whole area has been uplifted because of the greenery of that park.
You can see what's happening right now around Washington Park. Washington Park is a prime example of an inner city park with many of the problems that inner city parks have throughout the world. But you can see that next to this park, we have the new school for creative and performing art being built. We still have anchors such as the Symphony Orchestra and Memorial Hall. So even in a very inner city-like setting, the surrounding of the park is a surrounding that is going to attract the best of what that neighborhood has to offer.
Through relationships with sister cities that were deepened during creation of International Friendship Park, the parks were invited to complete projects in Munich, Germany, and Luzhou, China.
It has been completely funded through private donations. It would not be appropriate for us to spend any tax dollar on something like that. We found the private fund to design and build the garden in Munich, which opened in 2005.
In 2008, Mayor Mark Mallory attended the opening of the Cincinnati Park's second international project in Luzhou.
The city of Cincinnati has had a sister city relationship with Luzhou, China for 20 years. And this trip was all about re-signing the agreement and also about the dedication of a friendship garden in one of the premier parks in Luzhou that is dedicated to the city of Cincinnati.
And it's a wonderful dialogue and it's a wonderful exchange because people from those sister cities, they want to come to Cincinnati to see what's so great and green about Cincinnati. And in turn, people want to go to our sister cities to see what we've given to the citizens of that particular city and country.
I understand that the Japanese community is now interested in doing the same in Gifu for our sister city of Gifu. So the adventure continues.
Partnerships closer to home with the Hamilton County Park District and the Cincinnati Recreation Commission have also resulted in new parks.
We entered into relatively recently lease agreements with the Hamilton County Park District for them to operate two of our river parks. One is on the far west side of town in Sailor Park, Fernbank Park. It's still a city park, but operated now by the Hamilton County Park District. The other is on the east side of town. That's one of our newest parks Otto Armleder Park. It's on the Little Miami River in the Linwood community. They're wonderful parks. They both have new bike trails, they both have access to rivers, and they have new facilities, and it couldn't have happened without this partnership.
Making parks accessible to people of all abilities is another goal that's prompted new development.
Batman Natural Resource Center is 6 acres that was given to us around 1990, and it was given to us to turn into a nature center. We created on that site a sensory garden and an accessible pathway. And what's unusual about it is, given the challenges of the topography in Cincinnati, we're able to weave a continuous paved path at the top of the hillsides where we have overlooks. So people of all kinds of abilities can go through the pathway and have places to sit and rest and look out over the wooded hillside.
Everybody's Treehouse is a recently built feature in Mount Airy Forest that makes a treetop experience accessible to all. It's Ohio's only wheelchair-accessible public treehouse.
Somebody with a wheelchair can wheel all the way out into the treehouse and enjoy the forest just like you or I can when we hike around. It was a vision of a lady who thought that children or people of lesser abilities should have the same opportunity to experience trees in a forest that everybody else does.
In 2007, the Cincinnati Park Board celebrated its 100th anniversary with a fitting tribute, the Centennial Master Plan. Following the tradition of the Kesler Plan, it holds a vision for continued growth.
The leadership of the city of Cincinnati, I welcome you to the groundbreaking of Cincinnati Riverfront Park.
This is a good day for Ohio and for Cincinnati, is it not?
Cincinnati Riverfront Park is really an idea that's been on the table since 1997. So the region has been embracing, been waiting on what is this economic engine that's going to turn around the mud pit, for lack of a better word. Well, here comes the park.
This will be the new front lawn of the city of Cincinnati. And you always want to, of course, put your best foot forward. So this will be a truly fantastic park for the city of Cincinnati and for this region.
Let's dig in.
Thank you, Mr. Foltz, I appreciate it.
The park is something that will probably take a decade to build. So it's exciting for us in many ways. It's right downtown. It's a way to bring downtown back to the edge of the river, kind of bring the community in a lot of ways symbolically and physically back to where the city was born, on the banks of the Ohio.
Reflecting on more than 100 years of park history, we see the evolution of a system that's changed in response to the needs and philosophies of the Cincinnati community. Regulations come and go. New uses are added. Some activities remain the same.
People still go to their parks for the basic reasons, to recreate, to spend time with family, to get away from it all for a little while. But uses have changed over the years. I still have bus trips where people will tell me stories about, I remember we used to sleep in the park on summer nights. Not because they were homeless, but because housing was more crowded and nobody had air conditioning. Down in Washington Park, it used to be promenade time. Folks would come out decked in their best clothes, next to Music Hall. Now, what's one of the biggest things you think of with the park? It's like, oh, we're going to go to the park and have a picnic. Back in the 1890s, you couldn't have a picnic without a permit. So.
New concepts for what a park should be continue to emerge, resulting in opportunities that our ancestors could never have imagined.
We fairly early on introduced Wi-Fi technology into a number of parks because people like to be able to sit outside to do their work or to do their homework. A few years ago, people came to us with this relatively new thing called disc golf. And we said, okay, let's try it. And it's something that we've expanded. We've got 2 disc golf courses. A number of years ago, parks were just beginning to get into this concept of having fenced areas and calling them dog parks, where dogs can run off leash. It's not something we invented, but our park users approached us and said, how about it? I think through our research, Through listening to our constituents, looking at what others are doing, we're trying to stay ahead, we're trying to anticipate and make sure that our park system continues to be one that's responsive to our park users.
Regardless of shifts and changes, the parks have remained constant in their ability to provide enjoyment to generations of people in Cincinnati.
The parks in Cincinnati are a key part of the quality of life here. We appreciate the nature and the green space, whether it be big parks like Mount Airy Forest or Alt Park, or smaller parks in the neighborhoods, or the parkways leading to and from downtown. It's an important part of what we have defined as our desires and our preferences as citizens here.
Cincinnatians are heirs to a heritage of green, a heritage born from a commitment to conservation, a heritage built on the vision of the Kesler Plan, a heritage distinct in its architecture and art, a heritage delivered by generations of donors, advocates, commissioners, staff, and volunteers.
There are so many great things in the city of Cincinnati that we enjoy today because previous generations of people invested their time, their energy, their money, and their vision in those assets, and the parks system is one of those assets. We've got to have that same commitment for future generations. We've got to be willing to invest in and maintain and expand the system of parks that we have so that future generations of people enjoy what we have to enjoy today.
My grandchildren hopefully will use these parks.
It's part of our heritage. It's our sense of place.
It's been professionally managed for a long time. And I think it shows.
And certainly our park system gives everybody, regardless of income, regardless of where they live, regardless of race and background, access to nature. It's something that is very precious.